Have you ever heard a story that's just so wild, so unbelievable it has to be made up? Well, today we're talking about a man who went from being a faith's #1 enemy to its most important champion. This is the incredible story of Paul the Apostle, and we're about to dive into his epic, world-changing journeys.
Just look at this. It's like two different people. On one side, you've got Saul, a man whose mission in life was to stamp out the early Christian church. And on the other, you have Paul, the guy who would end up spreading it all across the Roman Empire. So the real question is, how on earth does someone make a flip like that? That's the mystery we're going to unpack.
Right, so before we get to any of the shipwrecks or riots or adventures, we have to start at the very beginning, because none of it happens without this first foundational moment, a complete 180-degree turn that changed one man's heart and, honestly, set the course for the next 2,000 years of history.
To really get the scale of this transformation, you have to understand who Saul was before. This wasn't just some guy who disagreed with the new faith. No, he was an active, brilliant, and powerful enemy. A highly respected leader, he saw Christianity as a dangerous threat and made it his personal mission to hunt down its followers. I mean, he was right there, giving a nod of approval at the stoning of Stephen, the very first Christian to be martyred. He wasn't just an opponent, he was public enemy #1 for the early church. And this is the moment everything flipped. On his way to the city of Damascus, with legal papers in hand to arrest even more Christians, Saul has this blinding, life-shattering encounter. And in an instant, on a dusty road, Saul the persecutor is gone, and Paul the apostle is born. His whole identity, his mission, his entire reason for being, completely rewritten. So with this new purpose, Paul is set on a brand new course. He teams up with a partner, Barnabas, and they set off on the very first major missionary journey. This wasn't just some sightseeing trip. This was the beginning of a strategic campaign to spread the exact message he once tried so hard to destroy. And Paul was smart about it. He developed a playbook, a method he used in city after city. First, he'd go to the local synagogue and share his message with his fellow Jews. Then, almost like clockwork, he'd face a lot of pushback. And that was his cue to turn his attention to the non-Jews, the Gentiles. And out of the people who believed, he'd plant a new community, a new church, and then move on to the next town.
And here's where you see the tables turn completely. The man who used to inflict the pain was now the one enduring it. His message was so radical that he was met with fierce, violent opposition. At one point, in a city called Lystra, a mob literally dragged him outside the city walls, stoned him, and left him for dead. And the crazy part? He got up and went right back to work.
Now, all of Paul's success with non-Jews stirred up a huge debate back at headquarters in Jerusalem. The big question was, do non-Jews have to become fully Jewish, following all the traditions, to become Christians? The decision they made at this conference was a game changer. They said no. And that decision right there is what unlocked the faith from being a small Jewish sect and allowed it to become a truly global movement. It was huge.
Okay, so with that massive question settled, Paul was fired up and ready for round 2. But this time, the journey was going to expand in ways nobody expected, pushing the boundaries of the map and even crossing continents.
You know, it's funny how things work out. A sharp disagreement between Paul and his first partner, Barnabas, actually ended up doubling the effort. They just couldn't see eye to eye, so they parted ways. But instead of the mission falling apart, it split into two. Barnabas went one way, and Paul picked up a new partner, Silas, and headed in another. The work literally multiplied.
And this is a moment that literally changed the course of Western history. Paul and Silas had planned to stick to what we now call Turkey, but they felt divinely guided, redirected, to cross the sea into Greece. That little change of plans, it marked the very first time the Christian message officially landed on the continent of Europe. And their arrival in Europe was not exactly quiet. In their first major stop, Philippi, they get arrested, publicly beaten with rods, and thrown into the back of a maximum security prison. But what do? They start singing hymns at midnight. And then, bam, a massive earthquake shakes the whole prison, their chains fall off, the doors fly open. The jailer is so freaked out and amazed by it all that he and his entire family become believers that very night.
From there, they made their way to Athens, the intellectual capital of the world. And here, Paul does something brilliant. He's standing on Mars Hill, surrounded by philosophers. And he doesn't just start preaching, he connects with them. He points to one of their own altars dedicated to an unknown god and says, hey, the guy you guys don't know, let me tell you about him. Some of them laughed him off, sure, but others were captivated and wanted to hear more.
So now we're on to the third journey.
And by this point, Paul's reputation is growing, which means the stakes are getting way higher. This part of his story is just marked by these incredible supernatural events on one hand, and even more intense, violent opposition on the other. And this slide just captures that tension perfectly. You've got these two extremes, side by side. On the one hand, you have this insane, miraculous power. Like in Troas, Paul preaches so long that a young guy falls asleep in a third-story window, falls to his death, and Paul just goes down and raises him back to life. But then, on the other hand, you have this fierce opposition. In Ephesus, his message is so effective that the local silversmiths, who make a living selling idols of the goddess Artemis, start losing money. So what do? They start a massive city-wide riot. Towards the end of this third journey, Paul knows that heading back to Jerusalem probably means he's going to be arrested or worse. And in a farewell speech to some church leaders, he says this. It really just lays his soul bare. He's basically saying his life doesn't matter to him at all. All that matters is finishing the race, completing the mission he believes God gave him. It's just an incredibly powerful statement of total dedication. So, after all the miles, the beatings, the imprisonments, and the riots, what did it all add up to? I mean, why are we still talking about these journeys 2 millennia later? Let's take a look at the lasting impact, the legacy he left behind. When you really boil it all down, so much of his world-changing impact comes back to this one simple number, 3. 3 separate, strategic, multi-year journeys that laid the entire groundwork for Christianity to grow from a tiny movement in Jerusalem into a major force across the Roman world. And this is the elixir, the treasure he brought back from his hero's journey. It wasn't gold or fame. It was this. He spread his message to non-Jews all across Asia Minor and Europe. He planted dozens of new churches. And maybe most importantly, he wrote letters back to these churches. Letters of encouragement, instruction, and theology. And those letters ended up becoming a massive chunk of the New Testament, shaping Christian belief for the rest of time. You know, when you look at Paul's life, the before and after the incredible sacrifice, it leaves you with a question that's just as relevant for us today. Looking at everything he went through, you have to ask yourself, what message, what idea, what purpose is so important that it's worth the entire journey?